So, all right, everyone, let's get started. So, the topic today is I asked the question, are we hanging on a thread? And then Marco Rubio offers a path forward. So, it really does feel at times, and maybe even most of the time, that we are hanging on a thread. Investors are jittery. That's very clear from the insane volatility that we're seeing every day. The market opens up only to go deep into the red, and then it seems to recover by the end of the day. It has just been such an incredibly volatile market. If you move off the markets and just if you're listening to the podcaster world, podcasters seem to be entirely focused on negative stories, and there are plenty of negative stories. The same with the mainstream media, just so much negativity out there. And if you just returning to the markets, the Magnificent Seven, which really led the stock market, the bull run over the last few years. Overall, the Mag 7 is really struggling. Uh, Mag 7 is down collectively by 7.2% so far in 2026. Uh, Tesla is down by about 8.7%. I'm using Tuesday's closes, yesterday's closes. Amazon is down by 12.9%. NVIDIA managing to do better. It's only down by about 0.8%. Microsoft down a whopping 17.9%. Google down 3.5%. Apple down 2.9%. And Meta with Facebook down 3.5%. Uh, Meanwhile, the S&P 500 as of yesterday's close was essentially flat for the year. The Nasdaq was down, which is tech heavy, down by closer to 3%. So you can see the market is very much consumed with negativity. This concept of hanging by a thread is pervasive. It's really encompassed by encompassing Wall Street, engulfing investors' thinking. And really, if we turn to investors, we've discussed this at length, but just to review, investors are worried about the AI disruption theme. They're concerned about GDP growth concerns, a lot of worry about the employment situation and perhaps an economic slowdown. Of course, the geopolitical situation is concerning, with perhaps a U.S. war with Iran looming. And we hear again and again in the media, and not only in the media, it's all over Wall Street, concern that the world is abandoning the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. Uh, and just to elaborate a bit more on that, again, this has been a theme we've discussed, but just to review, why are people so worried that the US dollar might lose its reserve currency status? Well, there's a few reasons there. One is the government, its debt stock has grown so large that it'll never be able to pay its debt back. And the only way that it'll be able to service that debt will be through the Fed printing money and financing the government. And that is what's known as the debasement trade, the dollar debasement trade. Money printing would just cause the dollar to plummet in value. Um, Tied to that are all these concerns about the loss of the independence of the Fed. We have Kevin Warsh, who is soon to take over as chairman of the Fed. And there continues to be concern that he will just obey the orders of the president and keep monetary policy excessively loose or keep interest rates too low. And that ties in with dollar debasement. And then finally, as it relates to the US dollar, you have this perception that the US role in the world is diminishing. And the Trump administration, according to this argument, has offended its most important trading partners. And all of our trading partners are looking now to diversify away from the US dollar. So all of these factors that I just kind of quickly listed are contributing to overall negativity in society. And there's plenty of other factors as well that I didn't mention, but these are those that relate directly to the financial markets. And as a consequence, we have seen short dollar positioning explode. And investors, and I'm really talking about professional investors now, professional investors are short the dollar and they seem to be long everything else. They're long gold, they're long silver, they're long the euro, they're long the British pound, they're even long emerging market currencies like the South African rand, the Mexican peso, the Brazilian real, everything but the dollar. They're shorting the dollar against all of these other currencies and financial instruments. And now we have confirmation that this narrative actually is 100% accurate. Bank of America, which has been collecting data on dollar positioning since 2012, a few days ago published a report, and the report shows that investors are the shortest the dollar they've been since they started this tracking this data in 2012. So now in 2012, when they started tracking this data, uh, investors were also very negative on the dollar, but they're even more negative now. So the question is, why in 2012 were investors negative on the dollar? And I just thought it would be useful to quickly run through why investors were negative in 2012 and compare it to today. Well, back then, the Fed had reduced interest rates to zero, right? They had done that in response to the great financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, and they had kept interest rates at zero. So in 2012, interest rates continued to be at zero. Not only that, the Fed was, because they felt zero interest rates weren't providing enough monetary stimulus into the economy, they had been printing money, and they were printing money all the way from end of 2008, early 2009, all the way through 2014. So in 2012, the printing presses were still running very aggressively. And just to go back, in 2009, the exchange rate, the euro dollar exchange rate, was moving very aggressively against the dollar and in favor of the euro. So the euro reached a peak against the dollar of 160, 1.60. That is, to buy 1 euro, you needed $1.60. That compares today that you need $1.18 to buy 1 euro. So back then it was $1.60. That was the weakest the dollar had ever gotten in all of history. And just so you know, the average exchange rate since the euro came into existence in 2000 was 1.16. So it took $1.16 to buy 1 euro. That's the average since 2020. So to get to 160, that is just sort of a catastrophic decline in the value of the dollar. So we mentioned so this was on the back of the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, huge money printing. Not only was there huge money printing, but the government was spending an enormous amount of money to try to get this economy going. And that huge spending continued, well beyond the crisis, and huge spending was continuing in 2012 as well. But what else was going on in the world? Well, geopolitically, again, we're talking about 2012. The United States was under the Obama administration, and Obama had spent the prior few years essentially apologizing to the world for all the wrongs the United States had supposedly done throughout our history. And Obama was shrinking the size of the military, so sort of withdrawing our military from the world, spending less and less on our military. And the reputation of the United States was in the process of suffering a major blow. We were no longer viewed as this economic powerhouse. We were no longer seen as the unrivaled military powerhouse in the world. China was fast coming on our heels. And strategically, the unipolar moment, that is, the United States being the sole hegemon in the world, was ending. So, for all these economic and geopolitical reasons, the dollar was suffering. So, in 2012, when Bank of America first conducted that survey, dollar bearishness was at an extreme for very understandable reasons. Okay. Now, we know there's a lot of gloom in the world today. And I want to now turn to Marco Rubio's speech that he gave this past Saturday at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. The reason I want to discuss Marco Rubio's speech is because I think it offers a real glimmer of light about the way the United States should see itself and how perhaps the world can begin to see the United States. I consider Marco Rubio's speech to be the most important foreign policy speech given in decades by a Republican. And I say by a Republican because Obama also gave many important foreign policy speeches. But his foreign policy speeches were highly damaging to U.S. security interests. They were important, but in a negative way. And that can be seen, the consequences of Obama's approach to foreign policy and geopolitics can be measured by our collapsing dollar during his presidency. Now, just to say a word about the Munich Security Conference, it is held once a year. It's held in February every year, and it focuses on international security, defense, and foreign policy. And the topics always cover NATO strategy. They always cover U.S.-Europe relations. And more recently, not surprisingly, they've also covered Russia-Ukraine, China and Taiwan, and Middle East security. Now, broadly, Marco Rubio discussed what the United States stands for in the world, and even more importantly, what the United States expects from Europe. Now, some of you may recall that J.D. Vance gave a speech a year ago, and he severely, severely scolded Europe in his speech. And that speech that J.D. Vance gave, it was widely covered in the U.S. media. He gave that speech also at the Munich Security Conference. So you might say that Rubio's speech this past Saturday was a vastly improved version of J.D. Vance's speech that he gave a year ago at this same conference. So just to refresh your memories, J.D. Vance gave a scathing speech blasting Europe for abandoning their Western values, opening their borders to immigration, and abandoning their military responsibilities by underspending on their defense. And he made it clear that the United States no longer sees Europe as a reliable partner. Not surprisingly, after Vance's speech, the Europeans and democracies throughout the world were deeply concerned that the United States might withdraw from its NATO commitment. I would say that Vance's speech was a Trump-like speech, but delivered more eloquently. Now, when Trump says things, it can be hard to know if we should take him literally, or perhaps we shouldn't take him literally. Perhaps he's giving his aggressive rhetoric as a negotiating tool. But when J.D. Vance speaks, it's far more likely that people will take his words literally. And his speech was indeed taken literally. Now, turning to Marco Rubio, Rubio is probably, not probably, certainly far better at international politics than J.D. Vance. And he understands the issues more deeply. Now, I said it was probably an improved version of J.D. Vance's speech. So Rubio made the same points, but he said it in a way that was more easily accepted and digested by the Europeans. And I would say other democracies throughout the world really accepted this speech in a way that they didn't accept Vance's speech. So Rubio's speech really consisted of 7 main points, and I want to review these 7 points. First, he says to Europe, you must be proud of your past. Your values and your culture have contributed enormously to humanity. You helped to spread Bible values. You brought the Enlightenment to the world, which led to people using logic and reason to solve difficult problems. And these Enlightenment ideas, which consist of using logic and reason, in turn led to the scientific revolution and ultimately to the Industrial Revolution. These are enormous accomplishments, he tells Europe. And you, along with the United States, have encouraged the rule of law to govern society, right? This is really, the rule of law was born in Europe. You encouraged free speech and freedom of religion. You brought the concept of property rights to the world, and free markets and capitalism is based on property rights. If there are no property rights, if people don't feel comfortable that other people and governments can't take away their property from them, you could never have a free functioning economy. He went on to say that Europe was also instrumental in helping to bring democracy to the world, along with the United States. All of these values and practices, which Rubio mentioned and which I just summarized, are what we call Western values. Again, I'm just paraphrasing from Marco Rubio. And these Western values are critical to a well-functioning world. These values have bettered every country who has embraced these Western values. And interestingly, all of our enemies oppose these Western values. Now, Rubio didn't single out and name these enemies who oppose these Western values, but we know who they are. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. I'm talking about the governments. I'm not necessarily talking about the people. I'm talking about the governments. And these governments and many others, not only do they not embrace our Western values, they despise our Western values and do all they can to fight and overthrow our Western values, the values which we Americans cherish. And you Europeans should cherish them as well. So that all falls under Rubio's first point, which was be proud of your past, because you were instrumental in creating these Western values, and the world is better off for it. His second point, our shared values make us, the United States and Europe, natural allies. And Our friendship has been critical to the world. Don't forget, together we defeated Hitler and Nazism, and together we defeated communism. We needed each other, and we still need each other. Number 3, why are your values, you Europe, the same as our values? Meaning us in America. Why do we share the same values? And this is where he gives enormous, enormous praise to Europe. He says, because we are your child. You came first. All the first immigrants in the United States came from Europe and brought these values to U.S. shores. America was born just 250 years ago, but we were born from you. The ideas of liberty, rule of law, scientific revolution, the arts, literature, faith in God, all these Western values. This is a holistic concept, and we piggybacked off of you. Now, he's giving Europe maybe some extra credit, maybe some undeserved credit, because a lot of these values that we call Western values flourished in the United States in a way that they really never took off and flourished in Europe, but very intelligent from a diplomatic standpoint for Rubio to heap so much praise on them, in my opinion. Okay, so that was the third point, that we are your child. That's why our values are your values. Number 4, we, the United States, need strong allies to defend ourselves and to defend yourselves. Together, we have the ability to build a new future for the West and our values. But in order to be a good ally, Europe, in order to be a good ally, you cannot be shackled by guilt and shame. You can't see yourself as colonizers. And it's not even true. You aren't colonizers. You have made the world better off, not worse off. Wherever you spread your values, those countries are better off for it. You planted seeds throughout the world. And everywhere where democracy flourishes, you have a responsibility. Thank you. A good responsibility. Something very positive. But you can't be ashamed of yourself. Mass immigration, your open borders have been damaging to you. Because of your collective guilt, you think you owe it to the rest of the world to let everyone into your countries as a form of repentance. But this guilt, your open borders, has been self-destructive. You are wiping out your culture, and you are destroying the value that you contribute to the world because your culture is being wiped out. Your Western values are being liquidated because of this mass immigration. Okay? We need a strong ally. Stop destroying yourself. You need to stand up for your own values. Stop destroying yourself with guilt. And that guilt has been transformed into damaging immigration policies. That's point number 4. Point number 5. We need you to be strong morally, culturally, and militarily. You need a strong army to defend your great civilization. But you need to know what you are defending. Because if you don't take pride in who you are, you can't be strong. If you hate yourselves, you can't be strong. Who's going to join your army? Who's going to pay taxes to fund your military? If you hate yourselves, you will be weak and incapable. Europe needs to uphold their own values. They need to uphold their history. They need to uphold their traditions. They need to be proud if they're going to have a strong army and be capable of defending themselves and their values. Number 6, and this is a bit of a pivot now. International organizations should not be above the national interest. Deferring to international organizations like the UN, organizations that oppose our Western values, this has had disastrous consequences and will continue to have disastrous consequences. You and we cannot surrender our decision-making process to international organizations. That's suicide. And finally, number 7, he says, we have to do this together. You need us, and we need you. Now, this was every bit as critical as J.D. Vance's speech, but it was said in a very different way. And Marco Rubio received a standing ovation. He scolded them, but he received a standing ovation. Why did Rubio get a standing ovation? I would say because it was not a Trumpian speech. When Trump speaks, and as J.D. Vance spoke last year, the speech came off as, in the eyes of others, those who are not Americans, and probably even many Americans interpret it this way as well, Trump's speech and Vance's speech comes off as totally selfish. America first sounds like the following. You, Europe, and you, world, you've been taking advantage of us, but no more. We are going to get even, and now it's our turn to take advantage of you. Trump sees international politics and economics as a zero-sum game. What is a zero-sum game? Your win is my loss, and my win is your loss. Well, let me say this. First of all, it's usually not true with allies. At least it shouldn't be. If America is winning, usually our allies are winning also. That's the reality. And if we're losing, usually our allies are also losing. That's the reality. So it's a mistake to present it as a zero-sum game when the truth is it's not a zero-sum game. What's good for America is good for our allies. That's the truth. Secondly, Rubio makes it clear that our values, Western values, which used to be and should continue to be good for Europe and good for the world. That is to say, Western values have always been good for Europe. They will continue to be good for Europe. Western values have always been good for the world, and they will continue to be good for the world. So if Europe pursues American interest, they're pursuing their own interest, and the world will benefit. It's not selfish. It's the opposite of selfish. Rubio is saying, we together, Europe and the United States, in history, have built an architecture that has made the world better. It's made you better off, it's made us better off, and it's made the world better off. Don't abandon it. You'll hurt yourselves, you'll hurt us, and you'll do incredible damage to the world. Now, let's go back to 2008. Since 2008, since the great financial crisis, The United States lost the thread. It lost the truth. It lost the importance of Western values. So what happened and is happening in Europe is also happening in the United States. Rubio didn't discuss this issue, but that's the truth, right? We have also gone off course. It started in the Obama administration. And in large segments of our society, it's continued. Rubio is offering the bridge to get us back on track. He's offering it to Europe, but he's also offering it to the United States. Now, this was the first time, as I said, any American administration official has articulated a creative way to demonstrate that the West, and in particular the United States, we are a civilizational masterpiece. A civilizational masterpiece. And if we don't recognize it, if we do not recognize the value of the United States in the world, not only for ourselves, but for the entire world, if we don't step in and articulate that view, articulate that vision, the bad guys will articulate their vision. And they're doing it. I personally believe that Trump does believe that American power is good for the world, not only good for the United States, but he doesn't articulate it in the way that Marco Rubio does. Now, part of that is because Trump is perhaps not the great, most beautiful speech maker. But there's another reason. Perhaps Trump also feels that his angrier message, a more self-serving message, perhaps he feels that message is more effective and appeals more to certain elements in his MAGA base. And he's constantly thinking about his coalition. Now, if you look at Trump's popularity rating, he might be appealing to certain members of his base, but his overall popularity rating seems to go down each month. And right now, it's probably the lowest it's been in his two, thus far in his two presidential terms. Now, I don't think Trump is going to change, but Rubio's speech has been praised across certainly by the entire conservative wing of the country. I have not seen anyone really criticize him among the conservatives. Now, if you hear JD Vance's public appearances, he believes that we protect ourselves by withdrawing from the world. Marco Rubio believes we protect ourselves by understanding that we have civilizational enemies. We are the civilizational masterpiece, but we have enemies. And he's telling Europe, and indirectly he's telling others in the world who are our allies as well, that we want you to be stronger so you can join us in protecting our civilization together. But if you don't think we have a civilization to protect, then you'll let anyone into your country. And if you think your civilization is oppressing the world, holding others down, then you'll even want to destroy your civilization. And that's what Europe is doing at this very moment. They are self-loathing, and because they're self-loathing, they're actively destroying their culture and their values. And by the way, this is exactly what the left wing in the United States have been trying to accomplish for quite a long time in this country, which is why our universities have been so poisoned by anti-American ideologies. But Rubio is saying we are defending and protecting something that is great. Now, how does this relate to financial markets? Can you see how Rubio's vision can be positive for the US dollar and for US financial markets? How he's like honey. Honey attracts. Yes, he's giving them criticism, but it's criticism given with honey and even love. Whereas the JD Vance version repels. It's all negative. So the Rubio vision of the world that he's articulating, that will attract investment flows into the United States. People will be drawn to the United States, drawn to our message, drawn to our story, drawn to our civilization. While the JD Vance vision repels, people run away. The world runs away. Yes, it definitely appeals to a certain segment of our society, understandably so. But it's not the welcoming vision. It's a strong vision. Marco Rubio has a strong vision, a powerful vision, but it's also embracing our allies. And you can see how that would be far better received by financial markets, by investors. So that's it, guys. I think Marco Rubio's vision really is one that offers a very bright future. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see JD Vance shift his tone a little bit because he had to have seen the strong praise and the welcoming response that Rubio received. So anyway, guys, let's see if people have any questions, comments. It doesn't have to be on this topic. It could be on anything.